So hello and welcome everybody to our NFDI ToolTalk. After a longer streaming break, we are also back live on YouTube now. And yeah, today the talk is hosted by NFDI for Biodiversity, and it is my pleasure to welcome Roman Gerlach. Roman Gerlach has a background in geography with a strong focus on geoinformation, science, and remote sensing. And after spending a few years in industry, he returned to academia and immersed himself more and more into data management and data infrastructures. So since 2012, he is leading the BEXIS2 development, and in 2017 he became the head of the research data management help desk of the Friedrich Schiller University in Jena. And since 2018, he's also the coordinator of the statewide Thuringia Competence Network on Research Data Management. And today he will present us the BEXIS2 Research Data Management System. And I'm looking forward to learn more about that and hand over to you, Roman Gerlach.
Yeah, thank you very much, Elena, for the warm welcome and introduction. It's my pleasure being here and presenting you today something about the research data management system BEXIS2 that we have been developing since 2011. And this talk was prepared with my colleague Jitendra Gaikwad, who cannot be here, unfortunately. He is part of the NFDI for Biodiversity. I'm not, but I'm closely linked with my colleagues. We follow the developments there very closely. And so let me see if I can switch to the next slide. Okay, now. Yeah, let me first introduce what BEXIS2 is in very short points. It has been designed for small to large collaborative projects. So it is a software that you can install for your project, for your active project phase, ideally for larger projects and not so much, let's say, single or two-person projects. So it's not a portal as such, it is a software. It is focused on active data, so we really would like to support collaborative projects in managing data in the active project phase. And so it's not a data repository as such, although it has, let's say, large overlaps with those tools that are available on the market. We have a very strong focus on tabular data, but it's not really limited to that. I will explain you in a while why we have this focus and what we are really up to on that. The next strong focus is on data integration and reuse. We try to encourage data to be really reused and integrated with other data sets. So we have some additional functionalities that usually goes beyond what a general repository provides. But I will also explain that in a few minutes. And of course, since we are publicly funded mostly, the tool is very generic, scalable, modular, and free and open source software. So you will find all the code on GitHub and you can download it from there and use it by yourself. And of course, you can also spend time on developing things on your own. Some of the key features that BEXIS2 provides, so we call them the end user features towards the actual researchers who are supposed to use the software. So not so much the data managers or developers or any other role that is more in support of researchers. So end user features in the system are, first of all, there is a search functionality, as you know it from many other tools. So you can find the data set by a simple keyword search. That includes an autocomplete. So if you type 3 letters, then you get some suggestions what the search term might be. There is some faceting, some filtering and sorting when you have your search result in front of you, and then you can drill down to the actual data sets that you would like to see. Of course, since it's a management platform, it has also features for uploading data. It's not just a simple upload. We try to really look into the tabular data, but also only the tabular data. Any other data types, you basically just upload the files. But for the tabular data, we take some extra effort. It also takes some extra effort for the users, unfortunately, but we try to support with the tool as much as we can. And of course, for each and every data set, you can specify permissions, who is supposed to see that, or who has access to that, and who can manipulate the data set if necessary. So each individual user can specify his own permissions on the individual data sets. But this really depends on the data policy of the project. We have dataset versioning implemented in the system. So whenever you notice an error, for example, in your data, you can fix that, and you just upload the same file with a fixed error, and it will automatically update that, and a new version will be created. Versioning also applies to different metadata changes. So whenever you change the metadata, you also get a new version, and you can also go back in the history and take a look at previous versions if you want to. A specific feature is the design or the implementation of data structures as an own entity, and I will explain also that a little bit more in detail. So you can design your data set structure. Keep in mind that this is the tabular data that we usually think of when we speak about those data sets. And you can specify variables, you can specify units there, and then you create a data structure, and that has its own life cycle within the system. And you can reuse that for any different data set that you think has the same structure. The BEXIS2 also comes with a single sign-on, so you can connect it to your local LDAP server in your organization. You can integrate that, so people don't have to get their own username and password. They can use the one that they are used to from their organization, if this is configured by, let's say, the administrator. And another feature that BEXIS provides is you have full access to the whole system through web APIs. So you can upload, download, and even change things through the API. So you're not left alone with only a user interface, which is a web-based interface. You can do everything also programmatically from the shell or from a script. And we also support some data publication workflows, since, as I said, BEXIS is meant to be an active project platform. We sometimes have the situation that those platforms, or those instances, as we call them, may not be there forever, like a repository. So you may have to migrate data to another place, another repository that takes on data for a longer period and keeps that safely there. And we have some workflows prepared for that, which also then allows you to get a DOI if you need to. Our basic concept in terms of data set is a data set contains the primary data. If I start here from the right side, which is basically the variables or the table itself. It contains also the metadata, which is a separate entity in our system. It contains that data structure that I mentioned, but it can also contain attachments that you can link to the data set. That can be, for example, if you think of a field station that measures some weather station, for example, that measures things in the field, you can also attach an image of that station to the data set, or any other additional information in any file type and file format you can attach there, or protocols, or any further description that's needed. You can simply attach that to a data set. As I mentioned, we've in BEXIS2, the data which is hosted there is mostly tabular. So the simplest way to have that is in Excel, CSV, or TSV formats. Of course, we prefer CSV and not Excel, but Excel is still highly required by many researchers, so we definitely need to support that, although it makes life a bit more complicated. Then we have also an additional file-based data that BEXIS can hold. This is a very simple approach. You just upload files of any kind, and then you specify the metadata for that, and then it's basically registered in the system and can be managed there. The challenge why we spend a bit more effort on tabular data is what you probably, or most of you probably know, is the heterogeneity that tabular data comes with. And especially with the communities that we originally worked with from biodiversity, ecology, or environmental sciences, the people that we worked with, they come with their own definition of a data set and a data structure. So the variables have very individual names. Every data set is basically different unless a group of people agrees to a certain structure and a certain definition of those variables. And to overcome that challenge, we have specified that concept of a data structure and variables that can be defined. And here is an example that we have faced in the past, where we basically allowed in one of the projects that we have worked with, we allowed all the users to specify the variables on their own. And we ended up with 18,000 different variables in 800 data sets. And as you can see from the example here, which takes a look only at date specifications, so variables that are supposedly defining a date, you have, I don't know how many, but let's say literally hundreds of different definitions of a date in those variables, and most of them can be sort of combined or can be combined or made much more easy if you align them and if you come up with a certain definition for those. If you go through the list here, maybe I'm not going to spend too much time on that. You see there's also lots of errors in there. So this is an original example. Despite the different formats that you can have a date in, you also find a lot of errors. And we had, in this particular project, we had a student that tried to map all those different variables into common variables that basically represent all these 18,000. And what we came up in the end is something like 80 different data variables, like generic concepts that then have being applied to all of those. So much of the heterogeneity could be reduced to something. It's not always like that. If you have, let's say, a very strict policy from the very beginning, of course, you can prevent such an explosion of different definitions. But we learned also from the experience that we have with different projects that it's very hard to agree on certain definitions among those different people, especially when you work interdisciplinary with different communities. It's really hard to find a common definition. but still we try to offer those common definitions of those variables, and then people can still, let's say, come up with their own, with their own additional information that they can attach to those variables. How does this look like in the system? This is a screenshot from the actual system that we have. On the left side, you see a number of different variable templates that we ship with the system. And those are, let's say, come from experience that we have with the different projects. And of course, you can, as an administrator of a system, a BEXIS2 platform, you have the freedom to specify them on your own, specifically for your project. But we try to provide some generic ones from the very beginning, so you don't have to start from scratch all the time. And those templates on the left side, you can basically drag over to the right side, and you can specify your individual data structure. You can give it a name. You can specify the order of these different templates, and then you basically create your own structure with your own variables that are then still linked to the original templates. And that helps us then later to find and search for certain things, because we have these more generic concepts included there. And there's also units involved, so each, or whenever applicable, a variable also has some units. Of course, some variables don't have really a unit, but in some of them we have. And you can also specify the units within the system that should be used. And you can always extend that, of course. And once you have created such a template, you can also download that as an Excel file, as an Excel template, and then you can fill in your data. If you go to the field or to the lab, for example, you can use that template and to fill in your data. In terms of metadata, the system supports very different metadata schemas, so you're completely free to define and select a certain metadata schema in the system, which you then can integrate with the whole application. Do you upload a schema definition, and then it automatically creates this matrix, or this mask here, this form to fill in the metadata. And it also, depending on how much effort you spend, you can also link that to additional concepts, which then in the background check whether this is a valid entry or things like that. So you can link it to some other resources in the background. So whenever someone enters, I don't know, for example, here, a publication year, then this publication year probably has a certain range of values that you can predefine, and then those checks are already applied. And you're quite free in selecting these metadata schemas. In terms of data access, of course, there is a simple download function through the web interface to the user interface that you can see. So there is a download button, and before you press download, you can do some filtering, some sorting, and selection of the primary data, and then what you see is what you get. You basically download only that subset of a data set that you are interested in after you did some filtering and sorting. And of course, you have different formats for downloading. And you can also download a bundle of the primary data, including metadata and also the data structure definition for further use. But since this works only on individual data sets, many people would like to have some sort of programmatic access to the platform. So you can access BEXIS2 through the API. And then we also provide an R package that you can install, and then you can directly link or directly access the data from R to the platform and pull that data from BEXIS2 into R without much hassle. It's just a few comments, then a few commands. Looking at the API data access, it's a very simple REST API call. So you have your domain name, and then you specify a certain ID of a data set, and you can then apply a filter if you want to. You can have a certain range of a variable, for example, that you want to filter, and then you can extract that information, and you get only that filtered values. And same as then also for the metadata, you can extract the metadata through the API, and also vice versa. If you have updated your data set, you can also push that again to the application, to the portal. In terms of data publication, of course, we would like to, and this is highly requested by many researchers in the projects we work with, is we would like to have the visibility for those data sets that have been made public. And it is possible to use BEXIS as a publication platform, but we also have some collaboration, for example, with the GeoBio Association, and also with the Biodiversity Data Journal. We had a collaboration where you can basically transfer data that has been stored in BEXIS2 application into those portals with an easier workflow than starting from scratch in those portals. And there's also a plugin that you can use to mint DOIs, those digital object identifiers within BEXIS2 if you want to. But it's an additional plugin. It's not, let's say, in the core functionality, because some repositories or some projects, they do not need that. And it also requires another, let's say, hosting organization like a library or any other institutional organization that is basically responsible and signing up with DataSite to get the DOI. So there's some legal requirements behind that. If we look at the administrative features, because we consider BEXIS not a, let's say, a tool that you will install as a single user. It is a software that you run for a certain group of people, for a working group, or usually it's a project or a collaborative project with like 10 or 20 or hundreds of people involved, where you collect the data from those people in one instance, in one platform. And we usually encourage users to have a certain data manager or a certain administrator that takes care of the application, but also takes a look at the data sets and what things, what has been uploaded there. So for the different admin features, we have a very customizable search interface where you can specify certain facets that you can go through the data to the search results, and you can basically play around with that whole representation of the search results quite a bit and adjust that to specific needs if you want to. We support multiple metadata schemas. I think I mentioned that already. So it's not only a single metadata schema, that is supported within the system, so you can have multiple metadata schemas at the same time and then search across them. Of course, that needs some mapping and some tweaking, so it's not automatically, but it can be configured. Then overall, we have an easily extendable architecture. We follow a modular design with BEXIS2, so you can integrate additional modules that you have developed for a certain purpose quite easily, even as a hot plugin, so you don't have to take the application down and then start it again. So you can just plug in the additional module and then run that, assuming that the development is tested and works well. Of course, there is also something like system feature permissions. So we don't have not only data permissions, we also have feature permissions on functionality within the system. So every function basically is behind that permission schema, and you can specify as an administrator what features are visible to what user group. Historically, we also supported multiple data management systems underneath, but lately we have sort of focused on PostgreSQL as a database system that holds all the data. So we mostly testing this, and the other ones we have not really tested anymore, since the requirement was not really there anymore. And most people are fine with an open source software data management system like Postgres. Also, we have sort of a multi-tenant approach, so you can change the look and feel quite easily. So have your own individual branding for your instance of your project. So if you look at the different BEXIS2 instances, you will notice that they look quite different. Although the structure, the overall structure might be the same, but they have quite an individual look and feel. And mentioning different modules and extensions, one of the modules is called our party and relations management, where you can specify people, projects, organizations, and with that, taking some of the burden to re-enter the same information over and over again, especially when you think of metadata and people have to enter their name, their affiliation, the project and organization. So all this information you can enter once in the system, and then you can reuse that in every different data set or every place where this information is required. There's also a functionality for a notification framework. So for example, some of the instances, they have sort of a request button. So the data sets are, let's say, behind an authorization mechanism, so they're not fully open in some cases, but you have sort of a request button that you can press, and then you enter some information, why you need that data set, for example, why you would like to have access, and then a request is sent to the authors of that data set, and then they can decide whether they want to grant you some access or not, things like that. There's also, for example, a module that provides resource management in some of the projects that we deal with. This is quite a valuable feature, because different instruments, equipment, facilities in the field or in the lab has to be booked, sort of a booking system for those equipment, where you can specify a certain time frame where you need that equipment, and then you can organize that in the project. So it's more of a more project management than actual data management. And there's other tools like a semantic annotation tool that has been developed in one of the projects that also contribute to the development. And if you want to see a full list of all the modules, you can take a look at this website. This is also on our general website. There's a sub-page for the modules. We also did last year an assessment, since this is a very prominent feature that have been requested by many people that work with BEXIS. We wanted to know how fair aligned actually BEXIS is. Of course, fair deals with data sets, and we wanted to know how much we as a tool provider support fair data. This publication has been published last year after some long evaluation and working on the subject, we use the fair data maturity model that has been published by RDA, and try to assess for each single indicator what BEXIS can provide in support of this particular criteria, particular indicator. And then we evaluated how far we can support the fair data principles. And as a result of that endeavor, you can see these 4 graphs here. You can see that BEXIS, to our assessment, is doing quite well in the findable and accessible indicators, and a little less on the interoperability and reusability. So we still have some work to do to make that fully fair conforming. And I would like to give you also a few examples of real instances, real deployments of BEXIS2. And the most prominent one is the Biodiversity Exploratories information system, which is a priority program by the DFG, started I think in 2006 or 7. And this is also the original project where BEXIS has been developed for. And this, let's say, the first generation was developed there. This is also where the name comes from, as you know, notice. And BEXIS2, the name 2, is basically the second generation of that first generation that has been developed for this particular project. And then back in 2011, we realized there's some demand from other projects that would like to have the same tool. Would like to reuse it, but it was too specific for that project. So we tried to make it more generic version of that original BEXIS2 software. And this is why the whole thing is called BEXIS2. But it's still, so the Exploratories project migrated all their data sets and all their functionality to this BEXIS2 generation of the system. I think 2 years ago, they realized after really a lot of effort in redeveloping lots of things, because the Exploratories also have a lot of additional features and a lot of additional functionalities in their system. That is probably the most complex project that we work with. But the Exploratories also largely contribute to the development, and all of their developments are also freely available. And another deployment of BEXIS2 has been realized with the German Center for Integrated Biodiversity Research, IDEF. Their data repository is existing, and it also has a certain multimedia module developed, and IDEF also contributed substantially to the development of the BEXIS2 platform. And the third one I would like to show here is the CRC Aquadiva, which deals with the, let's say, groundwater and biodiversity. And they also have their own instance running and also contribute a lot to the development, especially in the area of semantic annotation and enriching data sets. And there's a lot coming from this project. A quick outlook before we're getting closer to the end. We have been collaborating with BiodiVBank, which is a global repository and portal for structured biodiversity data. And there has been a recent publication just the end of September now, where you can get some more details what that project will be. We also are part of the NFDI for biodiversity, And as part of that, we are trying to develop BEXIS2 as a hosted service. So we realize that not all the interested parties are basically have the capacity to host their own instance and run that instance. And we try to develop a service for that, then you can basically book that hosted service and you can get your BEXIS2 instance and then manage that on your own, but you don't need to take care of the hosting and all that. And for the further development and the new features that are coming up, we are currently in the process of redesigning the whole user interface, using a new interface framework for that. So the whole client and all the look and feel will change slightly, and we also try to improve the workflows, which as always have some drawbacks after some years, and we try to improve that with that new interface. So there will be a number of new releases for this specific feature, for this specific update. But we also have spent some time on shorter release cycles to try to improve our development pipelines. So there's much shorter release cycles now. So we have, usually in the past, we had like 2 to 3 releases a year, plus some additional bug fixes and patches. But let's say some 2 or 3 major releases. And now we would like to have much shorter release cycles within 1 or 2 months, with then yeah, a little less features, but more response to requests and to bugs that have been found. Taking a look at the community, we have some development partners in the past that are listed here. The current developer base is largely within the University of Jena. Most developers that we have are located there. And here on the right side, you see some of the project instances that use the system. You can see most of them, or many of them, are DFG funded priority programs or CLCs. But there was also some other BMBF funded projects that use the software. As I mentioned, the whole application is open source, is licensed on the GNU public license 3.0, and all the code is available on GitHub. And if you want to get support, we have a core developing team that deals with all the repos and the bug reporting that you can reach through GitHub, but also through that email address. And we have also a community mailing list. If you want to get in touch, feel free to contact us in one of those ways. I would also encourage you to use the BEXIS2 demo website if you want to see the whole thing in action. You can go to that web page and play around with that. But we keep that, we update that frequently, and basically start that over. So don't expect your data to be there for a longer time. It's really just a playground to use. And finally, I would like to acknowledge all the contributors that have been made it possible to come up with that platform, especially also all the developers that have been participating over the years, and also the funding agency, the DFG, who supported most of the development in the past. And with that, I'm at the end of my presentation, and I would like to thank you very much for listening, participating, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thank you Roman, for this interesting introduction of BEXIS. And yes, we have some more time for questions, but only here in Zoom. So you can raise your hand or write a comment or do something else so we notice you. And I will give you some seconds to think about your questions and say goodbye to our YouTube viewers and end the streaming there. Thank you for participating.